Good afternoon for those of you who are in Spain. Good morning for those of you who are in America. It's a pleasure to be here again in this new session of our program Defense and Me 2.0. This is the second year that we are running this project in collaboration with the Embassy of the US in Spain and EE.UU and a number of Spanish universities. In this occasion, we have with us la Universidad de Murcia, we have la Universidad de Salamanca, and la Universidad Rey Juan Carlos de Madrid. So thank you all for being here. And as you know, we'll be talking about cybersecurity these days, which is a very interesting topic always, but especially in these uncertain times where we have a war in the doors of the European Union, and in which the cyber issues has always been very, very relevant. I want to thank you all for being here, our speakers, our students, and our partners. And I want to remind you that this is also part of a larger program which has a competition as our goal, as our end. We want all the students that participate here to present their proposals, your proposals, on how you see the topics we are covering, how you see the future of defense, the future of security, and mostly this year, the future of NATO. I just want to remind you all that in June, we will be having the NATO summit here in Madrid, where the new strategic concept will be approved. And of course, that new strategic concept will be surely much affected by the current events in Eastern Europe. I also want to remind you that we have interpretation in Spanish and English. You just have to to switch channel if you want in the menu below in your screens. And with further delay, I want to introduce our speakers today. We have Antonio Escarmeta, who's a professor at the Department of Information Engineering at the Universidad de Murcia. Thank you, Antonio, for being here with us another year. We also have Natalie Thompson, who's a PhD candidate at the University of Yale. She's an expert in cybersecurity and defense. Thank you also, Natalie, for joining us. We have Raquel Jorge, who's a researcher as a fellow at the Real Instituto Elcano. She's an expert in technology. She's also a Fulbright scholar and a contributor to EE.UU. And we have Adam Svensson, who's an analyst, educator, and researcher on intelligence and international defense, and he teaches at the Universidad de Salamanca. As I said, thank you all for being here, and I'll now give the floor to Antonio for his first set of remarks. Antonio, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, let me share my screen. 1 minute. Okay, can you see it? Yep. Okay, thanks. Okay, first of all, thanks for the invitation and for being again this year on these panels discussion. So as already was mentioned by the presenter in this case, by Cristina, I mean, in my case, I'm professor of the computer science. So basically I'm more on the technology, I would say, aspect of the cybersecurity in that sense. My initial statement here a little bit was to try to also indicate in the actual, I was at not political context, but more on the technological context, I would say, where we are now. What is the impact, I would say, or what are the challenges that appear specifically in the cybersecurity, and I would say on the cyber resilience as a way to be able to understand and react and mitigate this new kind of attacks that appear, I would say, in this context. So for that, I wanted to highlight that we are now in a very, I would say, interesting period, I would say, of the technology evolution, because now there are several, I would say, tendencies that are trying to in some sense increase the vector of attacks that we can have, I would say, in general, no? Because in one side we have all the new evolution that we are having in internet. You know, internet now is evolving to a highly interconnected space where not only persons and machines, but also devices, toys, goods, etc., are able to connect and able to provide information, but also at the same time to be able to be points of attacks, I was said, and introduce new risk, but also because the economy is having a quite relevant, I was said, evolution. In that sense, what's called now digital transformation in some sense, but that's basically what means that everything and most of the process in the industry and in the different sector now are being also use of the capabilities of connection, of the telecommunication, of the new solution like artificial intelligence, in order to improve and modify their actual behavior. No? And that is creating, I would say in general, I would say new threats, new risk, but at the same time, obviously, new opportunities that I think it's also important to also be aware that not everything is bad, but I mean, we need to care about what is happening. And in that sense, but at the same time, I think what in this scenario, it's important to understand that more and more is relevant the collaboration, I would say, between different stakeholders that are already involved on this kind of process, I would say, in some sense. No, so we are coming from, I would say, not an isolate, but silos of work in the production sectors. I was also in the society, and now I mean we are more in this interconnection scenario, and that's create, I would say, the more needs of all the stakeholders to be involved and to be aware and to be interconnected. No, and that's been from the educational side, I would say, to make people aware of this and to train and teach people how to manage with this situation, but also, and then obviously from the government side and also from the industrial sector and so on. So for that, it's quite important to create new tools. I would say, in some sense, we are now in a period where new tools are needed in order to be able to respond, to react, and to be able to mitigate this possible threat. But also, it's important is in very, I would say, short time of reaction. This is one of the things, significant aspect that we said that also is coming on this new situation. Here, just to show you up, I mean, I would call it the cybersecurity landscape. As you can see here, it's not to give the data, but to give you that now we are covering the whole, I would say, range of areas, no, from the society, I would say, from the economy. We're talking about the disruptive technologies. We're talking about solutions like autonomous systems, etc. And one of the scenarios that also is creating this capabilities is all the, as I already mentioned, Internet of Things as a technology, 5G as a technology, or now we are talking about 6G directly, not only 5G. And that's because it's creating the environment in some sense, no, that is really creating this possibility of this interconnection and of new threats, etc. Specifically in the scenario of the IoT, and I wanted to mention this is one of the critical, I would say, points on this situation, because they are becoming more and more part of our daily life in some sense. No, so it is not just we are talking about at the beginning it was like the idea of the sensors, like something, I mean, that is able to get data, but from the sensors we go to the Internet of Things, because sensors are connected to the internet and they are acting as any other entity on the internet. And now we're talking about the Internet of the persons in some sense. No, I mean, because at the end they are with us, they are part of our mobile device, they are going to be part more and more of the health system, so they are going to be part of our, they are already at our home with the TVs, with the Alexa, with all these gadgets basically that we are bringing there. And clearly that's creating a quite challenging scenario, because I mean instead of talking about a small number of possible devices that could be attacked, now we have plenty of them. They are totally spread over our daily life, and that is there's a lot of aspects that need to be taken into account. So the landscape of the security now and the possible threats that we can have here is increasing dramatically. And that's why I'm saying it's required that we take this into account, but also that the system, the solution, as I already mentioned, the industry is able to be aware of this and be able to react in a way. No, the cyber resilience that we are talking about will be quite affected, I would say, by this kind of technology and the capability of connectivity of these technologies, I would say, in some sense. No? So and then the other element that I think is more and more in our daily life, I would say, is how artificial intelligence also it's been part of these scenarios, I would say. And it's been part of this scenario because in two important ways. One is because it's more and more we have AI driving, our artificial intelligence driven threats. So the threats and the bad guys are able to use also the artificial intelligence in order to create new kind of attacks and new opportunities, I would say. But at the same time, in the other way around, also it can help basically the way to react, to predict, to understand when new situations are happening, when abnormal situations are happening, and based on this, trying to provide possible mitigation, try to identify these new threats, and being able to, in that way, also prevent and detect in a more efficient way new possible attacks in that sense. So it's the two sides of the coin, I would say, but it's important that this is something that is going to be more and more part of the new solutions that are going to happen in the future, I would say. No? So for that, and with that, I conclude this. I think it's something that we need to have in mind. I would say that we have a lot of new challenges, basically, because of these technology capabilities, because they are part of our daily life, and more they will be part. I put here this famous joke, saying about what will happen with about all these possible threats. In this case, a privacy threat, I would say that will happen, but it's not futuristic. It's something that can perfectly happen today. So that means that it's important, as I already mentioned, in this collaboration, what I call the governance of this collaboration. So all the entities, all the parties that are going to, the stakeholders that are going to be part of this, need to collaborate in order to try to react in a more a global way, I would say, and this implies also political, and that's why the European Union, in that sense, is making a lot of effort on trying to have a common, I would say, response, I would say, on the cybersecurity area in order to these new threats, etc., and to coordinate, for example, I mean, all the research challenges that are now being carried out in different countries, in that sense, and as I already mentioned, to create norms, I would say, in some sense, that also help on this process. For example, there are some efforts on this kind of a certification process of the security that could be happening in the future, so that we can have certain trust on devices, on systems that are being used in our daily life. And as I already mentioned, also to take into account how artificial intelligence could be used and could be used in the most appropriate way in order to help and not to disturb, I would say, on this kind of new solutions in the cybersecurity area. That's all from my side. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Antonio. Thank you for adding the technical side to start with, but also for making clear that cybersecurity has to deal with technical issues and developments and so on, of course, but also with individual attitudes, because as you were explaining, this has to do with absolutely every aspect of our lives, because we have that technology there. So thank you for that. Now let me move to Natalie, and she'll bring the perspective from the US. Natalie, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to caveat very quickly that while some of my comments and remarks draw on my experience as a staffer for the US Cyberspace Solarium Commission, I'm talking in a purely personal capacity, and I'm no longer affiliated with the organization. But I want to first start off by asking the question, what do we mean when we talk about cyber resilience? So there's lots of different definitions. And when I'm talking about it with you today, what I'm talking about is ensuring that we have the tools and policies in place to prevent, detect, withstand, respond to, and recover from cyber attacks, by which I'm primarily talking about compromises in the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. And I'm particularly concerned about these as it relates to critical infrastructure, by which I mean systems and assets like drinking water systems, the energy grid, and healthcare organizations whose compromise would be devastating to national security, to public health and safety, or to the economy. But I'm also concerned about the security of individuals' private data and the security of economic and democratic institutions. And so in the US, we've experienced a number of devastating cyber attacks over the past couple of years that have really highlighted the importance of this issue. So last year, a ransomware attack affecting Colonial Pipeline led to the temporary shutdown of one of the largest fuel distributors to the East Coast. In late 2020, details began to emerge of an espionage operation involving the company SolarWinds and other software providers that affected both private sector entities and federal government departments and agencies through a malware sent out as part of a routine software update. And we've also seen incidences of economic espionage where malicious actors attempt to penetrate the systems of private companies for economic or financial gain. And even with this kind of more scoped definition of cyber risk and resilience, there are a lot of different ways to approach the topic. I thought about a lot of different ways to structure this talk, but I'll kind of offer a way of thinking about it at different levels of analysis that we can dive more deeply into during the Q&A. And that's moving from the individual level to the international level. So at the individual level, do we have the people that we need to build resilience? Managing risk and building resilience depends on people as much as it depends on technology. And so we all have a duty to practice cyber hygiene by using multi-factor authentication, routinely updating our software, and using strong passwords. But we also have a real pressing need to ensure that we have qualified professionals in the cybersecurity workforce that are able to secure our systems and assets. So nationally in the US, we face a shortage of qualified professionals in this area. And we need to think about ways to expand the talent pipeline and retain qualified talent that we do have so that we have the best possible set of human resources to draw on. And so when I talk about the individual level, I'm concerned about workforce development policy and how we can widen the talent pipeline through traditional talent programs like expanding funding for programs that encourage students to pursue degrees and careers in cybersecurity, but also more innovative hiring programs that look at hands-on learning through apprenticeships, as well as upskilling and reskilling programs. Kind of aggregating up from the individual to the national policy level, the question I'm kind of interested in here is, do we know whose security to prioritize and what the cyber threat facing our country looks like? So our ability to secure our systems and assets from cyber threats depends on having a clear picture of what the threat landscape looks like. And so in the US, President Biden recently signed a piece of legislation dealing with cyber incident reporting that is a major step forward in this area because it mandates critical infrastructure owners and operators to share more information about certain types of incidents and ransomware payments. And this gives us a better picture of what the salient threats are to our systems and assets, who is being threatened, and how we can distribute resources to defend our critical infrastructure better. During my time working for the Solarium Commission, another one of our key recommendations in this sort of area of national risk management policy related to the codification of a concept of what we called systemically important critical infrastructure, by which we sort of meant critical infrastructure is critical, like it's in the name of it, but there are certain systems and assets that are like the most critical of the critical, and how do we direct resources to those systems and assets? And Antonio was talking about the importance of multi-stakeholder collaboration, and I very much share the importance I very much share the perspective that this is of central importance because in the US context, at least, risk management policy and strategy fundamentally involves the private sector, since so much of our critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector. And so we have limited federal resources. How do we decide who to prioritize among those private sector critical infrastructure owners and operators? And so the Commission's proposal focused on essentially providing an appropriate mix of benefits and burdens so that these especially important entities receive special assistance in their risk management policy and strategy, but they also shoulder additional security and information sharing requirements because of their unique status and importance. So aggregating one level further up, kind of looking at the international level and state-to-state engagement, in a digitally interconnected world, cyber threats that affect the United States or Spain have the potential to affect many other countries around the world. Cyber threats originate from all places around the globe. And a great example of this that I like to point to is NotPetya, and how in 2017, a malware attack that was designed to affect Ukrainian computer systems spread all across the globe and caused $10 billion in global damages to a variety of different companies. And so one of the things that's important in building resilience is engaging effectively with international counterparts in this area to promote a common vision of a free, open, interoperable internet. And so on the US side, our State Department has recently undertaken a major reorganization of our structures for engaging internationally by creating a new bureau. And this is, in my mind, a huge step in the right direction of elevating cybersecurity and digital issues across our foreign policy. And one area that I'm particularly passionate about that I think is ripe for further action is in strengthening international capacity building programs. So the US has money that it can use to support the efforts of international partners that are interested in creating their own computer emergency response teams, in developing national cybersecurity strategies, and developing workforce development strategies, and similar policies that aim at promoting national risk and resilience. And so a great example of this is there's a program called the Digital Connectivity and Cybersecurity Partnership, by which the U.S. Agency for International Development and other federal departments and agencies have created initiatives like the South Asia Regional Digital Initiative that focuses on strengthening private sector and civil society capacity to engage in ICT policy. And so these are, we like to kind of say, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so the more secure we are and the more secure our partners and allies are, the greater the benefits for the entire digital ecosystem. Sorry. So there are so many other elements of cyber risk and resilience that I could talk about. I'll conclude again by just reiterating that there have been a number of significant cyber attacks affecting the US in the past several years that have really driven home, at least for me, the need to think about this area of policy and strategy and prioritize cyber risk and resilience efforts. And hopefully this has provided one way of thinking about the different levels at which we have to assess that concept. And I really look forward to audience questions and to digging into some of these issues more deeply. And thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you for bringing the issue from the individual to how, and then how to escalate it at the different levels, national and international. Let me just, remind our audience that we will be taking questions from the chat. So if you want to make questions, make comments, please start writing them now, and then I'll give you the floor, or we'll share that with everyone. Natalie has explained the landscape of cybersecurity in the US, and now we would like to contrast that with the landscape of cybersecurity in the EU, the European Union. Raquel, are there many differences? How are we dealing with that issue here in Europe?
Thanks, Christina. And first of all, thanks very much for the invitation, and also for being part of this group of high-level experts on this topic. So actually, building upon what Antonio and Natalie said, I think that the EU landscape is quite interesting because, first of all, talking about the cyber resilience in this event is very timely because the European Commission is planning to release a proposal on the first ever European Cybersecurity Resilience Act by the end of this year in 2022. So that's good news. And actually, what do we mean in the EU when we are talking about cyber resilience? So actually, there are different layers, as Natalie said. So I will try to stick to the very high level of cooperation within the EU and also among member states. So from Portugal and Spain to Poland, to Lithuania, to France, to Sweden, etc., etc. So actually, there are several points in the EU. There are several challenges. The first challenge is that there are not enough qualified cybersecurity professionals to harmonize cybersecurity standards. That's the very first point. The second point is that vendors do not have the economic incentives to inform about cyber vulnerabilities when these. I'm so sorry because there is a storm in my place. Because actually they cannot inform about the cyber vulnerabilities to the public sector because actually they don't have the economic incentives to do so. Also, there is no common approach on how to inform about these cyber vulnerabilities. So I mean, at the national level, there are common standards, but actually at the EU level, it's not that broad and it's not that comprehensive. And finally, vendors do not have a common approach to assess the cybersecurity of products and services that they are using. And this is one of the main reasons why the European Commission is planning to release this first proposal on cyber resilience, on a cyber resilience act by the end of this year. So the EU has been long working on how to guarantee and strengthen the EU-wide cyber resilience. And I think that we can look at this notion or this topic through two lenses. The first lens is within the European Union. So how does the EU work from within on cyber resilience? The first thing that can come to our mind is the EU's cybersecurity strategy, which was released back in 2020, and the proposal for a joint cyber unit. And actually, what do we mean by this? So first of all, the EU cybersecurity ecosystem doesn't have a common space to work together. Second, even if sometimes EU stakeholders may work together, let's say at crisis times, as it has happened recently with the first ever activation of the EU rapid response cyber teams to respond to the situation in Ukraine, to these cyber vulnerabilities in Ukraine, still there is no culture of communicating to each other, and there is no culture of sharing information between member states and between EU agencies at, let's say, peace times. So we can share information at crisis times, but not that much at peace times. And actually, this is a challenge, because when we are talking about cyber resilience, we are not talking about sticking to the most dangerous situation in cybersecurity or cyber vulnerabilities. We are also talking about, as Natalie said, how to protect our energy grids, or how to make sure that actually at this event we have electricity to be talking in this event. So it's not only about war and super big conflict, right? The third point with this EU's cybersecurity strategy, and with this joint cyber unit which was proposed, is to make sure that there is a virtual platform composed of tools for secure and rapid information sharing between member states. This already happens at the EU's Agency for Cybersecurity, which is called ENISA, for those of you who don't know about it. But actually, the main point with this joint cyber unit is to make sure that EU countries share, first of all, cybersecurity situation reports, including information about incidents and also intelligence information. Actually, intelligence information is one of those most sensitive points, because actually in the case of the US is a single country, so the flux of intel information can be more straightforward, although perhaps Natalie can say more information about this. But in the case of the EU, there is no common approach on how to share cyber intelligence information among member states, because this is something about national security, right? So this is something about the national level. So the goal with the joint cyber unit is to make sure all countries can share intel information about cyber threats and incidents. Another point to make sure this cyber resilience is guaranteed among EU member states is to strengthen and mobilize more and more EU cybersecurity rapid response teams. This has already happened, as I said right before, in the case of Ukraine. So several countries, especially those countries from the Eastern European flank, and it's not a surprise, so they have agreed to help Ukrainian people, Ukrainian cybersecurity officers in this realm. But still, at the EU level, we are missing more and more and stronger rapid response teams for cybersecurity. And this actually relates to what Natalie said as well, because, for example, in the US, she highlighted how the US is working with several countries through several mechanisms and through several platforms. In the case of the EU, it's quite similar, but actually to a lesser extent, because actually we can see that the EU just released its strategy, its regional strategy for the Indo-Pacific last year, and actually it has agreed a number of digital partnership agreements with some Indo-Pacific countries, concretely Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and a bit with India. But actually the approach on cybersecurity is still quite limited. So it's mainly focused on digital, e-government, digital government, digital security, digital skills, but not that much on cybersecurity, and on how to make sure that EU's standards are similar to those in let's say South Korea, Singapore, etc., etc. One of the main interesting points is that when you look into the transatlantic relationship between the EU and the US, you have the case of the Trade and Technology Council, right? But still, cybersecurity is not part of the TTC, and that means that actually the US and the EU are partnering through cyber dialogues, also at the national level. For example, France has long partnered with the US through cyber dialogues. Spain has started to do so. I mean, Spain has always collaborated with the US, but under the umbrella of cyber dialogues as such, it just got started last year, we can say. So actually, the issue of how to make sure that at the EU level, but also between member states, we have a common approach to how to respond to cybersecurity, but especially how to share cyber information at crisis times, but also at peace times, is still something that needs to be further and further strengthened. And with this, I will stop here because I prefer prefer the dialogue. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Raquel. Let me please ask you to speak a little bit slower, so the public and the interpreter can hear you better. Thank you for also this overview of the European landscape. And now we'll be moving to Adam. You've all talked about intelligence, but he is going to focus on cyber intelligence. Adam, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I'd also like to extend my thanks for being invited to come and talk today on this panel. If you just bear with me a couple of seconds while I share my slides. Hopefully you can all see that. Wave to me or shout at me if you can't. So yes, as Christina mentioned there, I'm going to talk to you about the intelligence dimension and as I note here, the importance of intelligence, or cyber intelligence, or cybint, as I call it in short. So moving on then, how can we think about cyber intelligence, or cybint? And a good place to begin is with a definition. I rather like this definition here from a Carnegie Mellon report on cyber intelligence Tradecraft report, where the authors note cyber intelligence is essentially acquiring, processing, analyzing, and disseminating information that identifies, tracks, and predicts threats, risks, and opportunities in the cyber domain to offer courses of action that enhance decision making. So that starts helping us think about what we mean when we're talking about cyber intelligence. Definition of cyber intelligence I use and have developed from my own work is particularly when intelligence is operating in the cyber domain, is looking at the collection and processing, or the analysis of information that is particularly of military and or political value, and which especially purposefully relates to international relations, defense, and national, extending to global via regional security. So this very much looks at threats, but it's also looking much more broadly and widely at the full spectrum range of issues, problems, hazards, risks, up to threats. And also I go on to note particularly that cyber intelligence, or cybint, is also usually secret, covert, and or clandestine, and frequently, although not exclusively, has also included a private and non or sub-state actor contributions, state activity conducted by specialized intelligence institutions or organizations to understand or influence entities. So in terms of those organizations, in the UK, for example, we have the GCHQ, the UK Government's Communications Headquarters, which deals with the cyber intelligence remit. Why do we do cyber intelligence? Well, the rationale is very clear. It's essentially for cybersecurity purposes, aims, and ends. And as I flag up here on this slide I'm sharing with you, I'm showing the US National Institutes for Standards and Technology cybersecurity framework. And it's very much structured, as the slide shows, around these core steps of identifying, protecting, detecting, responding, and recovering. So this all feeds into that overall aim of achieving resilience in the cyber domain and in cyberspace more generally. Why also do we do cyber intelligence? It's also, as noted there, for fostering what we can argue is a sustainable form of resilience. We can say that cyber intelligence overlaps with M4IS2 concepts, so it relates to multi-agencies being involved, multinational, multi-disciplinary, multi-domain information sharing, and sense-making tasks. And again, these all range across the 8 entities of commerce or commercial sectors, academic, government, civil society, media, law enforcement, military, and non-governmental or non-profit sectors. And also the cyber intelligence work essentially allows for the ability to anticipate, for example, possible attacks or breaches of your systems, and then respond, for example, having the ability to bounce back and recover from your shocks you may experience, and then better assign attribution, any punishment or future deterrence should an attack scenario occur. And essentially, as shown again on the slide here, we see the cyber intelligence framework very much pivots around human and machine teaming, drawing very much on looking at the environmental context, then the data gathering involved, the threat analysis work involved, what threats might we be confronting, strategic analysis work, where might we be going with all of this, and then finally reporting and feedback to end users and customers. So, and then getting their feedback back, and then essentially being able to feed into the entire intelligence process. Essentially, it's worth recalling that we do cyber intelligence work for orientation. So it helps as a sat-nav, if you like, or a GPS system to find out where we are and where we might be able to go next. And I think it's always worth stressing that cyberspace is a domain in itself, but it's important because it also helps connect up all the other domains that are involved. And this picture here shows a conventional battle space, if you would like, with the different domains that are involved. So we're talking about the cyber domain, but we're also talking about the human domains, space, air, maritime, sea, and land domains when we're operating. So there's a lot to keep in mind when looking at cyber intelligence issues. And I'll happily address any questions you might have in this next session. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Adam. I think we've got a very good approach to the whole issue, both theoretically and with some specific geographical cases. We've been talking about this when we were connecting just before the session, but I would like to ask you to start with this question. I would like to ask each of you to focus on the specific example of the Ukrainian war. And I was telling some of you that a few weeks ago, I participated in an event in which the experts in general in security were surprised because they weren't seeing so many or so important cyber attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, cyber infrastructure. And my question for you, from your different perspectives, is why do you think that is, or is that the way it is? I mean, are we seeing less events in cyber attacks in Ukraine because we were better prepared, because we had more resilience, or we or the Ukrainians in this case, or because we just don't know, because we are unaware of what is happening? So maybe we can start again with Antonio. What do you think? What is happening? What is going on in Ukraine in this realm?
I mean, my understanding is that it is, we are maybe not getting aware of all the things that are happening first. That is what the first thing I would say. Secondly, already there have been quite a significant attacks already in Ukraine. Basically, you know, all the telecommunication system in Ukraine was mostly attacked, basically, the main operator in that sense, because one of the objectives, I was said, was to try to eliminate the access to internet to many of the partners, because, you know, now part of the world is playing on the social medias, not necessarily only on the physical place, I would say. No? So that's why it was in quite a significant attack. Also, there had been some attacks to other sectors, I would say, to the electric sector. So I think that there's already several of them ongoing. Maybe, I mean, the only difference that maybe people were expecting that this will be more like a non-classical word, I would say, in some sense. And what we are seeing, or what mostly we are seeing in the news, is something that resembled a lot to what was the previous word in Syria or either in Europe on the last century, I would say, in some sense. No? But I think that it is like a mix, I would say, in this moment, no? I would say, of interactions. And I think it maybe later when we finish this stuff, I think it will be also will be know more information about different kind of attacks. I think it was, I don't know, it was Natalie was mentioned at the beginning. No, people are, I mean, specifically the guys that are suffering the attacks try not to make it very explicit because it's also a way to demonstrate their weakness. I would say. And in this scenario, specifically the case of the Ukraine, I would say they are doing a very good job on trying to demonstrate that they are the victims here, and there's a lot of, I mean, obviously they are the victim, but I mean, but making it very clear, no, basically that the situation, and maybe I think part of the strategy is to demonstrate that they are more stronger, that maybe they at the end they will be. That will be my perception of the stuff.
Thank you so much. Who wants to go next? Natalie?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I'm always a little hesitant to comment on things like this because, I mean, as an external observer, I don't know is the honest answer. It's hard to say from the outside what the federal government knows, what the private sector cyber threat intelligence companies know. And so it could very much be the case that a lot more is happening than we in the public see. That caveat aside, one thing that I have been thinking about a little bit is how the sort of very proactive sharing of information about potential cyber threats has affected the risk calculus of Russian cyber actors. And so to me, this connects to part of what my former employer's sort of strategy that we laid out related to layered cyber deterrence entailed. And part of this strategy was about the denial of benefits, and essentially that if you want to change the risk calculus of malicious actors in cyberspace, part of the way that you can do that is that you can make it so that their attempted attacks are less likely to succeed, and their successful attacks are less likely to do damage. And what I wonder is, has all of the very proactive information that the US government has been sharing with our own private sector entities that might potentially become the victims of attacks, as well as efforts to share information with our international counterparts, has that changed the perception of Russian cyber actors who maybe see, okay, they are aware of the threats and able to better safeguard their infrastructure, and so we're less likely to be successful, and it's therefore not worth risking a provocative, costly attack because it's less likely to succeed. And so I don't know, that we'll ever know whether or not that's the case. There's very little that we can say about the internal risk calculus of Russian cyber actors. But to me, having come from this perspective, it's interesting to me to consider how the very proactive efforts on behalf of the US government to share information have affected the landscape and the risk calculus of these actors. So that's what I'll say, again, with the very important caveat that I don't know is the honest answer, because it's so hard to say as an external observer.
Thank you so much. Raquel, what do you think?
Yes, I mean, I fully agree with what Natalie and Antonio said, because actually, as far as we know, yes, there have been some large cyber attacks, but we cannot go into detail, and actually we don't know which is this risk calculus by Russian actors. What we know so far is that, and this is a pretty interesting point, is that it has not been only up to governments to support Ukrainian stakeholders and actors on cybersecurity. It has also been up to private companies and as well to cyber activists from Belarus. So because actually, as we know, the Belarusian government is more prone to is more in favor of Russia, but actually there are tons of activist groups in favor of the Ukrainian government. So they have been supporting the government since the very beginning. And also, and I think this could be of interest for the students which are here in this event, there are as well voluntary people that are voluntarily supporting cyber assets in the case of Ukraine, and actually they come from third countries. So I mean, I think this could be of interest for the students here, for those who are studying engineering, but also for those who are studying international relations, because as we are seeing here, cybersecurity is not only something about technical assets, but also about policy and strategy. So this will be my remarks.
Thank you. Adam, your turn.
Thank you. Yeah, I would also echo a lot of what has already been said. What I will stress is going back to that one of those last pictures I shared in my presentation there of the battle space. Cyber or cyberspace is very much a domain, and it links all the others. So in this current Ukraine war, we see the cyber area being very active. It's very true. We're going to learn more about it later, about those individual cases with particular names. I mean, what we know at the moment is, for example, Ukraine has a lot of very skilled IT people, information technology people, and they have big groups, and now they've been essentially unable to work because of the war going on in their country. Instead, they're now working on behalf of the government, or semi on behalf of the government. As Raquel mentioned, they're particularly these hacktivist groups. And there's a huge range of these different groups, all very actively working in the cyber domain, doing all sorts of hacking and attacking along many of the different pathways and channels and vectors that were very much introduced in our first presentation from Antonio in particular. And really just to say that over time we'll gradually hear rather more about that. And I think you can also say it's pretty lively at the moment in the cybersecurity warnings that are coming from particularly national authorities. So again, Natalie touched on that. And we're going to see much more of that as this conflict goes on. But I would say it's a very active area. Yet it hasn't got to the point yet where we have clear narratives and cases that we can really discuss in depth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me now give the floor to Professor Francisco Rodriguez, who also has a question related to this particular case. Marta, no sé si le has podido dar el acceso como speaker. Ahí estamos. Francisco, vemos tu pantalla, pero no te oímos. No sé si estás ya conectado. Ahora. Perfecto.
Hi. So thank you very much for this conversation. I would like, actually I posed the question in the chat, but I don't know if you could see. Basically, I understand it's a difficult question, but would this crisis in Ukraine will help to boost our joint European strategy, or conversely, the states will be still reluctant to share and cooperate in this field? Thank you very much.
Who wants to answer that?
I mean, I can answer, because I mean I am involved in one of the projects of the pilot on cybersecurity centers in Europe. We have 4 pilots, and one of the objectives of this pilot is basically to try to coordinate, as you mentioned, the mechanisms that we are working all over Europe in order to respond to different kind of cybersecurity aspects. One of them is about information sharing. Indeed, the Commission now, I mean, is clearly looking for some kind of collaboration between CERT and CIRTs at the European level. I think it's also someone, or Raquel, I think I already mentioned, because they already are going to follow up a directive in order to facilitate this kind of exchange between the national level, so that trying a little bit answer to your question. So I think that Europe has get a little bit up to now skeptical on data sharing, I would say, from the security perspective, but not only because of Ukraine. I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, more and more the member states already have taken, I would say, the worry about the need to strengthen their collaboration in this kind of different cyber crimes. I would say not only about I mean, this kind of attack, but also financial sector, for example, is quite aware of this, and now more and more they are trying to increase the capability that they will have in order to share information. Obviously, in some cases, the problem of sharing information is has also other kind of secondary issues, no, like impact about privacy, etc. But I think that already the technology is quite enough to solve this kind of stuff, and that's why now they are more I would say, or less reluctant, I would say, to share this information at national level, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, I would just add a little there. Yeah, I agree. Always any war conflict does add impetus to those types of initiatives. So I also see it adding initiative in this European context. It's also worth mentioning the collaboration that goes on through entities such as NATO, and also its Center for Cyber Excellence. And a number of meetings are occurring there, and also we've seen Ukraine come in there as an associate, as it were, that group most recently. So we see a number of different forums, so not only within the European context, but also through groups with and related to or associated with NATO. Thanks.
Christina,
thank you.
If I may to adapt a few more points. So this is a very interesting question, because actually when you look into the number of cyber sanctions that the EU has deployed, you can see a very strong difference between the EU and the US. For example, in the case of the US, as of January 2021, there were 300 out of 8,000 sanctions in the US were related to cyber activity. And then when you look into the case of the EU, you can see that up to 2021, it was just, there were just a total of cyber sanctions addressed to 8 individuals and 4 entities. So the comparison is very big and very strong. But still, I feel that even if that at the EU level, member states can agree on a coordinated attribution on cyber sanctions, for example, and they can strengthen this strategic autonomy altogether, but still the very legal consequences need to be applied at the national level. I feel that, as Adam said, that the upcoming EU-NATO joint declaration for cooperation between both organizations may be a good opportunity, especially in the case of Ukraine's situation. And I feel that a very strong, a very important takeaway from Ukraine's situation in how to strengthen the EU's coherence and strategic autonomy is the need to the need to make all member states cooperate at the same level of intensity. This is not that easy, because not all member states have the same level of knowledge, of capabilities, and as well of culture of organizations, this culture between ministries and governments. But I feel this has been an important lesson, that you need to share information even if you are not facing any crisis directly.
Sorry, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you for bringing up NATO, because that was the final aim of this session too, and we'll talk more about NATO later. But now let me give the floor to Ian. Ian, you are there, right?
Yeah, I'm there. I want to ask you about a concept you talk about, is that cyberspace has no geographical borders. That's true, but usually most of the cyber attacks are launched from the same countries. Also, the cyber defense capabilities are usually also developed within national interest. So which could be the next step in order to go beyond national or individual actions and move to a multilateral plan, or just a strategic defense capability or cyber resilience action in the international scenario? Thank you.
Yeah, are you addressing your question to someone specifically or to any of the panelists?
Well, actually, any of the panelists could. Thanks.
So maybe Natalie, you can go first.
Yeah, I would love to answer this question. And so I guess the short answer is that I'm not an international lawyer, so take my sort of knowledge here as not being, particularly legalese. But one of the things that we have seen happen at the international level is the development of norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. And so we've seen both multilateral and multi-stakeholder processes, some coordinated by the UN, others more private sector driven, to essentially create a roadmap for what responsible state behavior looks like in cyberspace. And one of the things that has come out of that is this idea that states should not knowingly allow their territory to be used for internationally wrongful acts in cyberspace. And so the way I understand it from an international law perspective is that this relates to the concept of due diligence, and that states have an obligation in certain contexts to essentially prevent their territory from they need to do their due diligence in ensuring that their territory is not used for harmful acts. And so part of the problem with some of these international norm efforts is that they're not particularly legally binding. And so there are, efforts to agree upon certain things about particularly the importance of protecting critical infrastructure and to secure these sort of voluntary commitments from states. And so the kind of two main UN-led processes have been the UN Group of Governmental Experts on Developments in ICT, which has released a number of reports that contain voluntary statements of norms, or and it often are accompanied by country-specific statements. And then you have the UN Open-Ended Working Group, which was a parallel process that arose after the UNGGE had begun. And then you have a group called the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, as well as the Paris Call for Trust in Cyberspace. And some of these efforts, again, are more state-driven or more multilateral in nature, but all of them aim to sort of come to an agreement about internationally acceptable behavior in cyberspace. That said, I think that one other area in which we're kind of moving from sort of just everybody doing different things at the national level is getting multilateral coordination on these things. And so Raquel brought up the sanctions programs in both the US and the EU. And one of the things that I was really excited about when sort of the EU began imposing its sanctions was that some of the people that they had sanctioned in response to malicious cyber activity were the same ones that the US had sanctioned either previously or around the same time. And so these kinds of multilateral actions to hold accountable individuals who violate either norms of responsible state behavior or who engage in specifically criminal activities is, I think, a really important step in the right direction. Because I'm in an international relations PhD program and I've spent a lot of time reading the more traditional literature, I'm reminded of sort of the comments of like realist theorists of IR that we live in a system that's fundamentally anarchic. There's, no international police. We're in a self-help system. And so, part of this is, I think, constrained by the ability of international institutions to meaningfully hold accountable individuals and entities that engage in this kind of behavior. But I think that there are, these efforts that are meaningful at the norm setting level, and then that create opportunities for multilateral coordinated action among like-minded countries. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's sort of my original kind of 2 cents on it.
Thank you, Natalie. Raquel?
Yes, so building upon what Natalie said, I feel that, and also answering to Ian, I feel that when we talk about, for example, cyber sanctions as a new or next step into multilateral response to these cyber vulnerabilities or these cyber threats or risks, the point is that sometimes we see that cyber sanctions are more related to national security laws, or at least just laws at the national level. So perhaps a very good, interesting point to guarantee multilateral cooperation on cyber is the issue of export controls and foreign direct investment, which maybe for the students here in the event may look like very distant, but actually when it comes down to the very application of these measures, this means that the US and the EU could cooperate in how to export outwardly to third countries several components of cybersecurity standards, how to make sure that actually when we are agreeing upon common standards at international organizations such as the International Telecommunications Union, which is a United Nations agency tackling with these issues, how the EU and the US may agree on common standards. I mean, if both sides cannot agree at the maximum level of cooperation, at least we should agree on the lowest common denominators, because actually we don't even have those lowest common denominators in some issues. So that's important.
Antonio, Adam, do you want to add anything to this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the main issue is that at the end is, it is difficult to think about like a collective answer, if you like, when we are talking about this kind of new threat, no? Because at the end, when you have an attack, when you have a cybersecurity breach, etc., it is normally affecting someone. Someone, I mean, an infrastructure of a country, or it could be affecting a company, if you like, and some. So normally, the answer and the mitigation action normally comes from bottom up, I would say, in some sense. What is important is that is this what we were just discussing or commenting about this, the need of the collaboration. What is more and more clear is that in some cases it's important not only to collaborate in order to identify that these attacks are being produced, but also in order to be aware that something is happening near you or in the surrounding, if you like. It could be in similar countries, because at the end it's something that is going to also affect you. No? So I think that this balance between local reaction but also global, I would say, mitigation is getting more and more important, because it's a little bit what I already mentioned at the beginning of my presentation about this globalization, I would say, of the interconnection and the digitalization. No? It's something that now, I mean, it's affecting more and more different aspects of our life, and at the end, it's going to really have impact over you, no? And that is something that the governments, I would say, because are mostly the ones that are trying to manage basically their local instance, are getting aware of this, and the need of this cooperation, I would say, no? In Europe, it's something that is difficult, because at the end, although we suppose that we are a common space and this kind of stuff, still there this national vision, no, about the defense. You know, the defense always, and still there's difficulties, as you can see now with the discussion with the Ukraine about the cooperation at the military level, at the defense level in general, if you like, because different countries have different views and so on. No? But I think that there's a convergence. I would say that it's taking time, but I think it's going. And I think that all these situations that are happening now, and maybe things that will happen in the future, not necessarily about war, but about other aspects, I would say, of the economy, are going to make more important this kind of cooperation and data sharing. That I think what is quite important here. Thank you, Adam.
Just briefly, this issue of whether we're talking about cyber defense or cyber offense, this thing of sort of hack back and whether it's included. Again, talking to the international relations world, ideally we'd have everybody signing up to these very good cooperative agreements, the values and norms from international law, the Talon Manual, and all of this kind of thing when it comes to cyber. But I'm afraid there's always going to be that realist streak in there. Collectively overall of national interests and countries going on the cyber offensive. And just to kind of throw it out there, I mean, really a country like North Korea, for example, is going to be very difficult to sign up to a sort of a Western liberal rights and international law regime when it comes to cyber. So you're always going to have this very potent mix, but ideally you get more and more countries to sign up to these cooperative arrangements like the ones we've already mentioned, and if possible, you try and buy them in other ways. Maybe they won't sign up to it on a political basis, but maybe you can persuade them using an economic tool to cease going out there on collaborative ways. So I think we're just going to constantly see these kind of processes going on and trying to connect up these different networks in all sorts of different ways at the different levels. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let me give the floor to Julio de la Guardia. Julio, please. We can hear you. No? No.
Okay.
Okay.
Good evening to everybody. My question would go to Adam. However, it's open for any of the panelists. I would like to know about this synergy between, cyber and intelligence in the field of Pegasus, which is a very trendy topic in Spain at the moment, and similar spyware tools that we might not had heard about them yet, but I take for granted they are in the market already. I would like to know what is your opinion about these tools that were designed for controlling and monitoring terrorists and criminals, but then have ended up for monitoring of politicians, human rights activists, journalists, both by autocratic and also democratic governments. So from your point of view, what can be done about it at an institutional level, governmental level? I think the European Parliament is working something about it. So yeah, that would be my question for you, and again, open to the panelists. Thank you very much.
Adam, please.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, I'll start with that. So I'm sure others have lots to add here. Yes, a very interesting case and a fascinating case study as a tool developed by a private Israeli organization. And it's also where to perhaps control it. We're going back to actually something I think Raquel mentioned a bit there. This issue of export controls as a way of containing, who it's sold to, whether it goes to a third party government, and then also to find out how and why they might be using it. And then if, as say, a commercial company, you feel they're going to be using it for nefarious means, well then, or illegitimate means, you then turn around and say, well, we will not sell our product to you, for example. So again, there are all sorts of ways that these systems can be developed and sold. I mean, my perspective on Pegasus was it was amazingly effective, and it seemed to be rather more effective than I think people realized at first. And also in the political sphere, it was used a lot more widely than I think people in the commercial sphere at first thought it probably would be. And actually for the company itself, you can say there was quite a lot of that classic blowback of the fact that they had this product that ended up being so effective that it then started violating privacy, and actually it became so effective as a tool that actually it meant that they could no longer sell it, because basically everybody starts pushing back because they recognized that the company had gone far too far. And so there are all these constant revelations coming out. I think, again, also the last couple of days or so here in the UK, we've had some reports coming out saying it was used against our current Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. And the trouble is, for a lot of the formal agencies, is they can neither confirm nor deny when it comes to these types of issues. So it's very unclear sometimes to discover, again, as an external observer, to what extent these products had been used. So one of the ways of telling really is sometimes going back to these companies from an intelligence perspective and just finding out, either through cooperation with them or running intelligence operations against them, what they have sold and who they've sold them to, and what capabilities those types of products have. So it's a bit of a roundabout answer, but I hope that helps fill in some gaps.
Thank you, Adam. Anyone else wants to jump in? Well, if not, I'll give the floor to Nadine Isabel, who also has another question. Nadine, please.
Thank you to all the speakers. It was so far a very interesting insight. So I actually put my question in the F&A, but just a quick idea of that is how you would think that a gender analysis is being considered in cybersecurity, as we know that marginalized groups and women are generally more affected of war in general. So how would that be, how is that being taken into account in cybersecurity? And I think this question goes to everyone who wants to address that.
Thank you, Nadine. Who wants to start? The gender perspective in cyber issues, cybersecurity, cyber intelligence. Is there such a thing, by the way?
I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I think it's an incredibly important issue, and it's one that's not discussed enough. I think that you're absolutely right that gender plays an important role in this in terms of how people become the victims of cybercrime or malicious cyber activity, and how we develop guidance for individuals in terms of protecting themselves online. And it's something that I don't think is fully taken into account. I mean, I know that one thing that would potentially be super useful in this area is just better research. And so there was a legislative proposal in the US to try and get more information kind of generally about the state of cybercrime in the US, because I think there are some reluctances to report this kind of information, and a lack of clarity about who to report it to. Do you call sort of like a local police department and tell them that you're the victim of cybercrime, or do you call the FBI and like file with the Internet Crime Complaint Center? And so having a better sense of what cybercrime looks like and its gendered aspects is, I think, incredibly important. And so as we think about providing victim assistance, as we think about trying to gain more information about cybercrime, including that gendered perspective is particularly important. And I know that there are some researchers, namely a woman named Leonie Tanzer at University College London, who's very interested in investigating intimate partner violence as it relates to cybersecurity, and how intimate partner violence can arise through sort of like unauthorized access to individuals' personal devices and those sorts of things. And so there's that sort of element in terms of how malicious cyber activity can impact people in gendered ways. And then there's also sort of, I'm always very passionate about the workforce development piece, about how women in STEM is super important, and we need more women in the cybersecurity workforce, and we need a more diverse and inclusive cybersecurity workforce. And so encouraging women in particular to and to pursue degrees related to cybersecurity, to pursue careers related to cybersecurity is something that I think is also super important. So, but my main answer is sort of, this is an incredibly important aspect that's not being talked about enough. And so I'm really grateful that you asked the question.
Thank you. Raquel, you just shared a document.
Yes, I mean, it's the profile of Leonie Tanzer, the one that Natalie talked about. So I mean, I fully agree with you, Nadine, and I think that this question is highly important, especially because, I mean, I will try to add some points because one of the main concerns, as Natalie said, is that there is a lack of research on this. And actually, when you look into some of these producers of cybercrime, I mean, usually cybercrime is mainly carried out by informal, clandestine, and illicit groups. So this means that these people commit organized crime, illicit activities, etc., etc. So if you try to translate the very traditional nature of these organized crime groups into a new group of organized cybercrime, you can find out that actually the presence of women is still quite limited. So, and why? Because actually, I mean, there is a sort of organization where men are taking over the lead in these groups. Second, there is a limitation in the number of women working on cybersecurity. And third, if you look at cybercrime, it's very difficult to find out information and data about this, because first of all, it's organized crime, and second, it's quite difficult to find the information on women. So yes, I fully agree. And one additional point is that, for example, in the case of the EU, there has been a recently announced proposal or initiative, let's say, to try to engage more women working on STEM studies, especially cybersecurity, to evaluate EU-funded projects on cybersecurity. Why? Because actually they want these cybersecurity projects, which are funded by the EU, to have an approach to gender balance and to gender equality, but also they want more women to assess these projects, because otherwise you are overlooking this gender approach. So I think this is pretty interesting, because sometimes we can say that you will try to make sure that there is gender equality from the top down, but actually you also need people to do it from the bottom up. So it's not that easy.
Thank you, Raquel. Adam?
Yeah, just to add there, from an intelligence perspective, a lot of intelligence analysis and assessment work is done using what are known as factors and indicators, and obviously the gender angle comes in as part of that whole. I mean, you have loads of lists of the different criteria, if you like, under your factors and indicators, and of course gender features there. So that's how it would be taken into account. So, for example, something like NATO, it works with a systems of systems tool known as PEMESI, which relates to political, military, economic, social, informational, intelligence, and infrastructural factors. As part of that, obviously under the social, for example, the gender angle would be covered in the analysis work. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have almost 15 minutes left, and I have two questions for all of you. And I also want to give the floor to Alejandro Cano, who was the winner of the competition for the Universidad de Murcia last year. So let me just launch the questions, then I'll give you some minutes to answer, and then I'll give the floor to Alejandro. The questions have to do with two issues that you've raised throughout the conversation. One of them is the professionals dealing with cybersecurity. Natalie, you mentioned at the very beginning that it's hard to find professionals in the US. And we are dealing here with universities. You know, you are all parts of universities. So I wanted to ask you, how are we training these people that we need, not in the future, that we need now to tackle cybersecurity in all its multiple angles? What kind of skills do they need to be trained as such professionals? And what are you doing? What are you doing from your different institutions to improve this? This would be one of the questions. And the other one, we've also mentioned NATO throughout the conversation, but I wanted to know, what would you expect from the coming NATO summit in this field, in the field of cybersecurity? What would you ask the leaders who are writing that new strategic concept about the future? So I'll leave it there. Please, who wants to go first?
If you like, I can start. Regarding them, as you mentioned, there's clearly, in general, there's a lack of engineers. I would say engineers are unprofessional in all these STEM areas. I would say in general. In the case of cybersecurity, it is quite significant, indeed. Also because, as we already have been discussing all this time, and there's have been quite a significant shift, I would say, of the cybersecurity over the time. No? In that sense, it's not, I would say, the classical, profile that you can find maybe in some centers. It's something, it needs to be much more, I would say, multidisciplinary in the way they need to tackle with the problem of cybersecurity in that sense. So I think that one of the initiatives now that also is being carried out, driven by ENISA, is to try to agree on a collection of a catalog of professionals, I would say, in cybersecurity, profiles basically on cybersecurity, so that also we can try at the European level to agree on the kind of training that is needed and what is the kind of studies that can be harmonized all over Europe for this kind of new kind of profiles that are happening there. No? Specifically in the case of Spain, I would say in our case in the University of Murcia, we already, we already started discussing on this in this working group with ENISA, etc. We already are preparing a master on cybersecurity. There are several in Europe. I mean, in Spain. Well, I mean, in our case, it will be the first one in the University of Murcia. And already what we have tried is to identify a little bit, or to map, I would say, this kind of profiles already been discussed at the European level to the kind of expertise that we can have in the case of University of Murcia in that sense. And in the preparation of that master, what we already have tried to do is, as already mentioned, to try to be a little bit more broad, not just thinking about purely of technology, but taking into account, I would say, process analysis also. So basically how it could affect basically the process of the industry, I would say. Also the legal part, I would say, legal, mostly ethical and privacy aspect, that I think is something that is quite linked also to the topic about the gender that was just previously mentioned. I would say. In that way, we have tried to be a little bit, I would say, more, and also to connect with the professionals in the sense and what is happening on the market. So not to be just purely, I would say, focus on, as I already mentioned, on technical study, but also about how this technical study can be applied to different sectors, different domains, and trying to bring people from the industry to be part of the master to better understand what are the challenges and the problems that they already have in there. That I would say is at least from my initial answer from our side. And regarding the NATO meeting, I would say that one of the most important things that still is happening is what we just mentioned, is this division between civil and military usage of technology in the cybersecurity sector. I would say still, we were talking later about the communication between the countries, but now either in one country, I would say you have this kind of two units working on cybersecurity on the civil sector and cybersecurity on the military sector. And I think that more and more these need to be quite interconnected, I would say, and more linked need to be created. And that's it. So I think that a kind of increase of the collaboration between the civil and military cybersecurity will be quite important in the future, and it will be something I will ask, I would say, to this kind of summit.
Thank you very much. Natalie, maybe you can go now.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I feel like Antonio's answer was really covered a lot of the things that I wanted to say, but I mean, I guess I would just reemphasize sort of on the workforce development piece, the importance of multidisciplinary training. I mean, certainly we need more engineers, certainly we need more qualified technical experts. But I think that, you know, as Nadine's question kind of highlighted when in asking about gender dynamics, there are a lot of different perspectives that go into cybersecurity, and having a breadth of expertise in this policy area is, I think, especially important. And so my personal academic training is in political science and math. I am not a technical expert by any sense of the word. And so one of the things that I found really fruitful, though, is finding ways to engage with technical experts and be able to talk to those types of people, even though I'm not an engineer by training. And so whether you come at this from the sort of the social sciences and need to be able to talk to engineers, or you're an engineer and need to be able to understand the social implications of cybersecurity and related developments, to me, that's an incredibly important part of workforce development and training. As Antonio was talking about kind of creating a framework for understanding, different roles and responsibilities, I was reminded of something that we have in the United States that was developed by the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, which is the NICE framework, which kind of does this thing is it takes the NIST cybersecurity framework and it maps on different pieces of it to specific roles and responsibilities. And there's been some incredible work done by an organization called Cyberspace to look at the US cybersecurity workforce and kind of identify priority areas for future workforce development. I think that that's an incredible initiative. One thing that we always need more of, particularly as it pertains to federal workforce development issues, is a better sense of how people come into the cybersecurity profession, what career development looks like, opportunities for people who, perhaps already have university degrees and have had a career to transition into the cybersecurity workforce, either through hands-on learning, through apprenticeships, or through upskilling and reskilling programs, so that, just because you don't have a university degree that is technical in nature doesn't mean you can't become a cybersecurity expert and pursue the kinds of certifications and skills that make you valuable in our cybersecurity workforce. I think one other thing that's particularly important in this area, since from the sort of federal government perspective, there's a lot of competition with the private sector for qualified talent. If you have a well-resourced financial sector that can pay lots of money to qualified cybersecurity talent, what encourages people to go into the public sector instead is something that we need to pay attention to, in creating incentives for folks who have the talent and who have the skills and training to go into the federal government for that kind of work, whether that's on the US side or in the EU, and actually creating opportunities for the exchange of talent between the federal government and the private sector, so that folks can sort of spend a year or two in a new role and share that information kind of person to person. So that's what I would say on the workforce development piece. I'm not sure that it directly answers your question, but it's a couple of things I was thinking about. On the NATO side, I'm not sure I have a great answer to this question. One thing that I am thinking about as we go into this is, so as I understand it, the last sort of strategic concept came out in 2010, and this is, there's a big opportunity to look at the strategic concept. And one of the things that I think has fundamentally changed since 2010 is this renewed emphasis on great power competition and kind of US-China and EU-China relations. And I think that the recent conflict in Ukraine has maybe reoriented people's priorities, and kind of we're talking about this upcoming summit against a very different geopolitical background than we would have been had this happened a year ago. But it's, I think, from my perspective, important to remember that before the sort of escalation of the conflict in Ukraine, US policymakers at least were very, very concerned about what US-China relations look like. And so how that factors into the conversation and how we think about this sort of emergence of geopolitical rivalry and the transition away from sort of thinking about terrorism and non-state actor threats as sort of salient in developing defense plans and concepts is something that I'm interested to see how that factors into the NATO summit. So that's my response.
Thank you very much. Adam?
Yes, I would very much echo. I mean, starting with NATO, very much really beefing up a lot of the NATO cyber capacity is really an outcome from these latest meetings. So as part of that, more resources, classic sort of more money, more people devoted to those areas. And join up, as we've talked about quite a bit during today's session, any gaps in the collaboration and maybe at particular levels and all the rest of it. On the side of the sort of what skills, it is very much, again, I echo much of what's been said already, of bringing together social scientists with computer scientists and trying to get that perfect meeting between those disciplines. In particular, from my side, I try to do it through teaching, first of all, intelligence generally, but also developing courses focused on cyber intelligence. I'm also biased in the sense that I want to see more of an intelligence angle in cybersecurity, because time and time again, you could say sometimes attacks have got through, and then you think from an intelligence perspective, well, have we been doing more, or had a broader lens, cyber intelligence lens here? Then perhaps we could have prevented that attack. All too often, I think sometimes cyber intelligence is put in terms of cyber threat intelligence. My argument there is there's too much focus on the threats, and that really need to have that broader spectrum, as it were, looking at issues, problems, risks, hazards up to those harder and faster threats. So that's what I have to offer. Yeah. Thank you very much. Raquel, your turn, please.
Yes, so thanks. So touching a bit on NATO, I think that another takeaway for NATO-EU cooperation on cybersecurity, and as well in NATO as such, is this recently announced and released the Diana mechanism. So the Diana platform is the defense innovation accelerator for the North Atlantic, and one of its main goals is to foster accelerators and test centers for different technologies. In the case of cybersecurity, there are several centers around Europe and as well in Canada, in Canada, that will try to work on a much stronger cyber capabilities, especially to try to ensure interoperability for equipment, capability development, etc. And for me, one of the main lessons of this Diana program is that NATO doesn't only need to ensure that the governments can work through interoperable equipment and capabilities, but also that they need to engage startups. And this is, and this is incredibly important, because actually when you look into cybersecurity, as all of you have said, it's not only about qualified talent at the governmental level, it's also about how the private sector is getting more and more talented workforce. So that's why it's very important to try to engage these startups. So small companies that are working on a very specific project, asset, or capability of cybersecurity, which may be interoperable with other companies that perhaps have never got to know each other. And this is why the Diana project at NATO is highly important. And as well, how NATO and the EU could cooperate through this. I mean, sometimes when I need to make policy recommendations for some people at NATO, I always think about a common marketplace between NATO's Diana program and these EU's European Innovation Council mechanisms. So I feel that actually if there is room for cooperation, it's just a matter of finding those common denominators that both sides can agree on.
So thank you all. It's been extremely interesting. Now I want to move to Alejandro so he can share with us some of his experiences last year participating in the competition, but also participating in the trip to Brussels. Alejandro, please.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. En primer lugar, pediros disculpas. Ya había avisado de que iba a hablar en español. Gracias a todos los ponentes. He intentado seguiros lo mejor posible, a pesar de que estaba trabajando, pero desde luego que es un auténtico placer estar aquí por segunda vez consecutiva, escuchando estos debates tan interesantes pues, que nos trae el Global con la colaboración de la Embajada de Estados Unidos. De verdad que se agradece un montón. Bueno, en primer lugar, agradecer que siga este proyecto adelante. Personalmente lo disfruté muchísimo el año pasado. Me gustaría animar a todos los compañeros y participantes en el concurso de Defensa y Yo. Creo que
to participate in the competition. I think it's a very unique.
En el panorama de la OTAN, sobre todo, cómo se contempla, ¿no? Todo esto que estábamos comentando ahora mismo, como decía Adam, el tema de cerrar una línea clara de defensa, ¿no? De estrategia en ciberdefensa por parte de la OTAN, pues es algo que tuve la oportunidad de comentar directamente con algunos de los responsables de la organización, por ejemplo, sin ir más lejos con Carmen Romero, ¿no? Su secretaria general de la diplomacia pública, y me comentaba además ella que 2030 iba a ser un año muy importante, que podía cambiar el discurso, ¿no? De la estrategia en esta cumbre en Madrid. Bueno, respecto a la experiencia, pues sin duda fue increíble. Estuvimos conociendo algunas de las misiones operativas que tiene la OTAN, entre ellas los AWACS. Estuvimos con unos militares españoles que patrullaban diariamente el cielo en busca de inteligencia sobre los territorios que sobrevolaban, y desde luego que bueno, un montón de cosas muy interesantes. Sobre ciberdefensa y sobre todo lo que, en acorde a lo que estábamos comentando esta tarde, creo que ahí me di cuenta especialmente de que la ciberdefensa no es solamente cosa de ingenieros, ¿no? O de perfiles técnicos, sino que es muy importante la geopolítica, el tener una estrategia clara y sobre todo el cómo aplicas tu fuerza de disuasión, ¿no? Para prevenir conflictos. También un poco en línea de todo lo que comentábamos de la guerra híbrida. O planteábamos las dificultades sobre algunos de los debates o foros que tuvimos ahí en nuestra instancia en la OTAN, lo difícil que es desde un país occidental luchar contra la desinformación, porque al final nosotros, precisamente por nuestro modelo de sociedad y nuestra libertad a la hora de comunicarnos libremente, eso precisamente es nuestra flaqueza, ¿no? por el hecho de que cualquiera puede publicar cualquier noticia, mientras que otros países, como puede ser Rusia, China, etcétera, pues tienen controlado su internet. Bueno, sin duda fue para mí una oportunidad increíble en la que pude hablar con creces sobre estos temas que me apasionan. Creo que aprendí muchísimo, que me enriqueció mucho tanto a nivel profesional como a nivel personal. Además conocí a un grupo de personas extraordinarias, por supuesto la delegación que llevó Global, la Embajada de Estados Unidos en España, con los que mantenemos a día de hoy contacto. Seguimos haciendo eventos, intentando, bueno, estar en contacto, ¿no? Y seguir de la mano. Entonces, bueno, la verdad que es un auténtico placer. Os animo a todos porque creo que la experiencia es única, y muchas gracias por todo.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro, por tu contribución y por tus palabras ahora. I just want to reiterate my thanks to all of you, to the audience, to start with, the students who's on the other side of the screen, to you all, the panelists. It's been really, really interesting. We still have many questions, but we'll leave them for another day. We still have a lot of chances to talk about these issues. Of course, I also want to thank the universities involved, Murcia, Salamanca, Rey Juan Carlos. Thank you very much for partnering in this project, and the Embassy of the US in Spain. I want to send a special thanks to Virginia, our translator. She's been doing a great job throughout the conversation. I know these are not easy topics to speak about, and thank you so much, Virginia. And I want to invite you all to participate in the competition. As Alejandro said, you know, there are chances, and the prize is worth trying. Is this trip to Brussels to visit NATO headquarters and other European institutions. And finally, I just want to remind you that our next and final debate on this program will be on April 28th next week, and we'll be talking precisely about the future of NATO. So we hope you'll be there. Thank you very much to you all. Have a nice evening, morning there. Bye-bye.